To Venezuela now, where an American journalist has been deported back to the U.S. Military forces arrested Cody Weddle yesterday. His assistant, Venezuelan journalist Carlos Camacho, was also detained.
Weddle had been working as a freelance reporter for a local news station in South Florida. It's the latest attempt by Nicolas Maduro's regime to crack down on journalists and press freedom. CBS News State Department reporter Christina Ruffini is following the latest in Washington. So, Christina, how does this latest incident involving this American journalist being arrested impact the already tense relationship between the United States and Venezuela?
Good morning, guys. This is the second American citizen journalist to be arrested in Venezuela in the recent weeks. If you remember, Jorge Ramos was detained for several hours after a sit-down interview with President Nicolas Maduro. Maduro, he said, apparently didn't like the questions he asked, and he and his crew were detained at the palace. Their equipment was confiscated for several hours. Eventually, they were released. But Weddle's case is an escalation because he was actually at home. He lives in Caracas, and our understanding is that there was a raid. Police showed up at his house and arrested him and his assistant. He's a freelancer for a number of outlets, including a station in Miami. And I think what this shows is because the situation in Venezuela has reached a bit of a stalemate, messaging and what the media says is becoming increasingly important to shape this narrative, both inside and outside of the country. In lack of actual momentum, any sense of momentum being written about or talked about in the press could have ramifications either way, and that's something Maduro is very wary of.
So when you talk about, the military sort of showing up at his house, I wonder about Juan Guaidó, who illegally left the country and then came back. And so far, he seems to be able to, he's continuing to sort of be a very active alternate president, if you will. But, what sort of challenges is he facing right now? The military is still with Maduro.
Right, and the military, as we've talked about, Emery, is key to all of this. Look, I think Guaidó and the U.S. were both hoping that by now we'd see more high-profile defections. There have been several, but they've mostly been lower or middle-ranking people. And I think one of the big problems is even though the U.S. and the Guaidó governments have made offers of amnesty, it's just a hard sell. Politics don't exist in a vacuum, and although history doesn't always repeat itself, it does tend to echo. And these high-ranking military leaders who've been very loyal to Maduro for so many years saw what happened in Iraq when the U.S. ousted Saddam, right? Anyone who was in the Iraqi Ba'ath Party was banned from holding office in government. So most probably think that if they defect, sure, they might not go to jail, but they won't be able to make a living in the government because they imagine the same kind of thing that happened in Iraq will happen in Venezuela. And look, it's not great living for anyone in Venezuela, even for the people who are still on the military payroll. It's a very hard place to exist right now. But I think, unfortunately, for Guaidó and for the U.S. interests in that country, the calculation by a lot of these officials seems to be that they're going to stay dancing with the one who brought him, even if he's stomping all over their toes.
And, Christina, what is the Trump administration doing to further their support for Juan Guaidó and challenge Nicolas Maduro?
They're doing everything they can, and we've seen a bit of a push this week. The White House announced these measures to put more economic pressure on Cuba, which has been a key supporter of the Maduro regime. John Bolton threatened sanctions against financial institutions that support Maduro. And we're even seeing the U.S. do its own version of putting a little bit of pressure on journalists. Earlier this week, the State Department press corps got a lecture on the language we use to describe Juan Guaidó's position. The State Department said it's vital that we refer to him as the, quote, interim president and not opposition leader, a self-appointed president, or anything else, because anything else would be playing into the narrative of a dictator. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier, why Maduro is cracking down on journalists. Weddle was reportedly doing stories on the military. The military, as we just talked about, will be key to pushing this one way or the other. So both sides, in fact, are highly sensitive of the messaging right now, and any hint of momentum either way that could push this towards a resolution or a revolution in the coming days and weeks and possibly months to come.
All right, Christina Ruffini for us. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, guys.